All right, let's get started. I want to welcome everyone to today's presentation, Public Leadership Institute's online training series. Particularly today, it's a timely topic given the state of our country, the state of our public discourse, and I mean, a tool that public leaders around the country are clamoring for. We're going to be talking about how to persuade in an era of hate speech and fake news, and come away with some concrete skills to continue to move the conversation forward, win over who we need to win over, with the goal of getting enough to advance the public policy solutions that we're advocating for. My name is Dave Woodward. I am Public Leadership Institute's National Network Director. I'm a local county official, former state legislator, and will be your host this afternoon. A few housekeeping issues that I want to just address. A little more information about the Public Leadership Institute is that we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy and leadership center focused on bringing public attention to key public policy issues of equity and justice, and working with public leaders to improve the economic and social conditions for all Americans. You can get a lot of our information, including publications that we make available to the public at www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. Publications you'll be able to see there is the most recent edition of the Progressive Agenda for state and local communities, Voicing Our Values, which a lot of the information today is going to be lifted from that, and a playbook for abortion rights, which is a special abortion rights project that we're working on, which is model policy and messaging information to not only protect but expand abortion rights in this country. But you can get all these publications exist in a digital format at our website, www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. And we do have some hard copies. Feel free to contact our office or go to Amazon to purchase your copies to support the cause. These type of sessions that were brought to you every 2 weeks are intended to hopefully present information that you can put in direct practice. But at the same time, we also want to get feedback. We want to bring your voice into the conversation to make certain that all your questions, ideas, pushback can get addressed, and really turn these sessions into as much a conversation as possible, so that is most useful for you to support the work that you're doing in your local community and or state. To that end, we've got a number of ways you can join the conversation today. If you have audio capabilities at any time during this presentation, you can click on the hand icon on your control panel, and it'll put you in the queue. Our presenter today will pause multiple times to allow for questions to take place, and if you have audio capabilities, we'll unmute you so you can ask those questions directly. I realize that people join us from a variety of locations, and sometimes audio is not a luxury that you have, and so typing questions in the question bar is also something that is made available, and we will try to get to as many of those questions that time allows. You can also email me at dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org. At any time, and if there's questions after this presentation, you can, we'll definitely get them answered and get them back to you. A question that regularly comes up is, will this presentation be made available after the fact, or if people have to leave early? You will be able to go to our website and get a playback of these live streaming sessions, and so feel free to do that again at www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. So like I said, today's topic is about how to persuade in an era of hate speech and fake news. Our presenter, no stranger to these sessions, the one, the only, Bernie Horn, who's Senior Advisor to Public Leadership Institute, former policy director, communication trainer, author, a mentor of mine. Bernie, thank you for being with us today.
What an introduction, my goodness.
Boom! All right, I'm going to hand control over to you.
Very good, and let's see if we can press the right button. Okay.
Perfect.
Very good.
There we go. Thank you, Bernie. Take us away.
All right, well, welcome everyone to George Washington's 285th birthday today. And I do not think that any of the founding fathers would have believed the situation we're in today. Sure, they had their own forms of prejudice, and there were definitely partisan newspapers, but they all believed in rational thinking. They all believed in objective truth. They were products of the Enlightenment, an intellectual movement, but here we are. This webinar is a fresh look at what's driving and motivating the radical right, how that's affecting persuadable voters and the progressive base, and what it means for message framing on any issue. Dave and I are going to take this show on the road. Next week, we're going to be in talking to state legislators in Colorado. The week after that, we're going to be with state legislators in Ohio. After that, we're going to be with legislators in Pennsylvania. So this really is a trial run, and we would sincerely appreciate your ideas and feedback, either through your questions or through emails. We really want to make this presentation better and as best it can be, because we're going to be out there talking to people. Almost everything I say here is on the website. Also, our progressive agenda on the website covers a dozen issue topics and links to 200 model bills, and our playbook for abortion rights is 29 proactive abortion rights model bills. Our message book, Voicing Our Values, gives practical advice for talking about dozens of issues. So our overall goal on this website and everything we do is to try to be as practical as possible and give you real tools to help you, engage from the progressive side. Now, politics is the art of persuasion. When we attempt to persuade, the language we use really matters. It makes a difference whether your audience listens for rational arguments, which is what we're generally making, or whether your language engages their emotions and they go off in the wrong direction. In addition, language can cue up in audiences' minds ideas that are either more for you or more against you. So we have to be careful of our language, and that's what we talk about in these sessions. Generally, political science is based on the assumption that people mostly act rationally and that their political opinions and the way they vote are mostly based on self-interest. And we have a pretty good idea about, what the problem is and what rational thinking would say. White voters, non-college educated white voters have been ground down by shifts in the economy over years that on average they're worse off than they were 2 or 3 or 4 decades ago. And there's plenty of rational evidence for this. I'm going to give a little of it. Because of globalization, automation, and computerization, manufacturing jobs have substantially declined. These were the jobs that held up the economy for non-college educated Americans. People could earn a middle-class wage, and this was mostly because unions negotiated those wages. And because of competition for good workers, even non-union skilled and semi-skilled jobs couldn't pay too much less. It held up, wages for everyone. And the result was that even people who were not very skilled got living wages usually, back when gas stations weren't self-serve and you had gas station attendants. I guess you all have to be a certain age to remember that, but they could support their family. There really was much more of a living wage for non-college educated Americans. This attack on the middle class wages hit Americans particularly hard as a result of the Great Recession that obviously was caused by George W. Bush's program of deregulation and his total confidence on markets. Obama, as you can see, where wages take this huge drop as Obama becomes president, Obama spent his whole presidency trying to catch people up to where they had been before. They weren't aware of this chart. They didn't know what was going on. All they could feel is that under Obama, they lost all this money and they, had these fundamental economic problems, and that's all they knew. Now, if you're not familiar with this chart, because this chart's printed in many different places and in times, I urge you to look this up because I think this is the most important economic fact of our lifetimes. From the end of World War II until the mid to late 1970s, the increases in our national wealth were shared pretty equally among the rich and the not so rich. As our economy created things of value, average compensation for workers increased at the same rate as productivity. So this was reasonably fair. And this is when John F. Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all boats, you see that line before 1973. That's what he was talking about. As productivity increases, everybody benefits equally. Boy, would he be surprised at what happened after that. In 73, or in some charts, it's more like 1980, doesn't really matter. Wages essentially flatlined, and virtually all the increase in productivity was taken by the rich. There are a variety of causes. Deregulation caused opportunities to increase profits. Tax cuts benefited the rich. But I think the biggest change was cultural. Before Reagan, it was shameful for the rich to be greedy, or at least openly greedy. It was wrong for company owners to overtly screw their own workers. Such owners could be or were stigmatized. People were afraid to, be jerks. What changed was, as expressed in the movie Wall Street, the idea that greed is good, that it's morally justifiable or even morally righteous. Greed was normalized at some point, during the Reagan administration. Anyway, since the Reagan, the system's been rigged to benefit the rich in so many ways that it's hard for average people to even recognize it. But it's pretty easy to make the rational argument that the wealth that all of us create is being sucked up by this small minority. We're not getting it. And this is the last of these slides about the rational explanation. The rich own a preposterous percentage of our country. The pie chart on the left includes real estate, which is interesting, but not too relevant because people can't spend the values of their houses usually. The chart on the right is assets other than real estate. Here, the top 1% own 42% of all the wealth. The top 5% own 72% of all the wealth. The bottom 80% own only 5% of non-real estate wealth in the United States. This becomes a real problem in politics. The rich are so incredibly rich that once the Supreme Court allowed it, and the culture changed, so they weren't shamed or stigmatized for trying to buy the system, they went out and bought it. So now, today, if you're rich enough, you can even be the Secretary of Education with absolutely no credentials for the job, right? You can just kind of buy it. So why don't we tell that story about the rich being the cause of people's misery? Average people are being destroyed in the system. Say, hey, voters, vote for us and we'll help out the average people. And actually, this story could work. But it's not so simple. That's what we want to talk about now. It's not so simple, unfortunately. Most voters don't vote based on rational reasons. Their beliefs are emotional, or at least their strong beliefs are emotional, not particularly logic-based. Right now, white, non-college educated voters blame their perceived economic situation on people who do not look like them. the bad guys may be Latino or Muslim or uh, African American. I'm gonna roll all that into the idea of racism, even though it may not technically be race. It's about how people look, literally people of color. Here's just an example of that emotional power, you know. When voters are thinking about bad guy immigrants, are they thinking of Melania Trump? She's an immigrant. And interestingly, when she first came to the United States, she apparently worked as a model without proper authority, which would make her an illegal immigrant. But Trump supporters are not hating or fearing people who look like that. Nobody's complaining about Canadian immigrants. My wife's hairdresser is British, was an illegal immigrant for 10 years. Nobody cares. That's not what it's about. It's not about being an immigrant. Right? This picture came from an anti-immigrant website. This is the picture that, you know, these people have in their minds. Sadly, racism is easy to stoke. You know, it's always been easy to use racism or anti-Semitism or fear of some supposedly outside group to divert attention away from the real problems in people's lives. It's happened over and over and again throughout history. And since I think you know that, I won't go much further in that. I just want to add that this fits into a broader psychological category that I think that you should understand. A great deal of the average person's self-image comes from their social identity, the group or groups that they think they're part of. This is rather basic psychology. In these people's minds, it divides the world into us and them, or also called the in-group and the out-group. The us can be something as unimportant as which football team we support. It could be about our social class or our family or our state or our country. Being part of the group makes us feel good inside. It enhances our pride and self-esteem. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, if you are a fan of the Washington Nationals and it makes you feel good to be among them, there's nothing wrong with that. But we can also enhance our self-image by denigrating the them. People can feel good inside. Literally, inside themselves, they're feeling good in their minds by blaming or being prejudiced against or discriminating against an out-group. You know, when Donald Trump expresses himself and says they're a bunch of losers, that's what he's doing. I mean, he's actually feeling good about himself by denigrating the other side. People work that way, unfortunately. So it's rather easy to use this tactic to get people on your side, because when you do it, it makes them feel good. Not only they feel good about their identity being on your side, being white, let's say, but they also feel good by denigrating the other side. This is a very dangerous business. I don't want to be too much of a downer here, but this is how genocide begins. So there are two stories that could be told. The story of how the rich are to blame for the troubles of non-college educated white Americans, which is the rational explanation, or that it's the out-group, it's the non-whites. Persuadable voters, and probably most of the conservative base, hold both these beliefs in their heads. Traditionally, Democrats win by attacking Republicans as the party of the rich. Traditionally, that works. Polls show that Americans agree with that attack. I mean, Americans agree that the rich rig the system, and they agree that Democrats tend to be the party that's on their side against the rich. But the right wing has overwhelmingly supported the racist explanation, while Democratic leaders have overwhelmingly not voiced the rich are to blame explanation. I mean, there are two explanations, but only one of them gets any play. An idea in the brain is strengthened by repetition. For people to believe stuff, it's actually more important for them to be familiar with the idea than for the idea to make any sense. For the past 8 years, Fox News, right-wing radio, the Tea Party, the Koch brothers, fake news sources have repeated and repeated and repeated their lies that immigrants and Muslims and blacks are to blame. Just last night, my wife noticed that Fox News was carrying story after story about urban crime. Wonder what they're trying to do. They're creating an alternate reality. And it's a reality that Donald Trump actually believes himself. I mean, that's where he is, really. That remark he made about terrorism in Sweden, I don't know if you read the story about how that happened, but he watched a Fox story where Fox mashed together essentially questions about terrorism and answers that some Swedish police gave, but the Swedish police were talking about crime generally. They weren't being asked about terrorism. So it was an entirely fake set up news, and Donald Trump believed it. It was there on Fox. To him, that's reality. And unfortunately, to something like 40% of Americans, that's reality. So, here's where we are. Poll after poll shows that voters believe rich individuals and wealthy corporations have rigged the system to benefit themselves. Poll after poll shows that voters believe Democrats when they say this, and that when the issue is the rich against the rest of us, voters trust Democrats and distrust Republicans. I mean, that's just all the Democratic pollsters find that. This is not a controversy at all. Now, I love President Obama. I love him. I think he is incredibly fantastic. But for all of you Star Trek fans, he is Mr. Spock. For non-fans, who I think may be the outgroup here, Obama is just entirely rational, and he makes almost no decisions based on emotion. He thinks everybody should be rational too. So he rarely ever made the argument about the rich to blame for average voters' troubles. He just couldn't see how that mattered, really. Outside the Sanders campaign and the left, there was almost no repetition of this story for 8 years. And I like Hillary Clinton very much as well, but she didn't tell the story either. So the right wing has two advantages, and I'm going to wrap this up and ask for questions on this section. The right wing has two advantages here. One of them is that it's just so much easier to make your arguments based on emotion and racial bias, or to be more scientific, the out-group. That's one. And the other is that the right wing has repetition for their ideas where our side doesn't. We don't take some piece of truth and repeat it over and over again. Our side seems to think it's okay to just say it once. And that's where I'm going to stop for questions. After the questions, I'm going to suggest 5 ways the progressives can push back. They may not seem like they're enough to overcome this terrible situation, but it's what we can do. So now I'm going to ask for questions, and the questions can also be, what I've missed or what I should be stressing here instead of what I did stress, because we really want to make this better.
So we have a few questions that have come through, but if you have, raise your hand if you have audio capabilities, and I'd be happy to call on you. Let's just jump into some of these questions right now. I can find them. William's asking for some citations, actually. So on the graphs that you shared, Bernie, where would people go to find those? The productivity and growth rate, and in others, where would people go to find original source material?
When we post this on our website, which will be about 24 hours, which is publicleadershipinstitute.org/webinars, we'll add a document that gives sources.
Perfect. There we go. All right, we have a question from Paula here. Paula, are you with us? Hello?
Yes.
Hi, Paula. How are you?
Yes. I'm good. So this is okay. My question is, your explanation makes a great deal of sense. And I have a very dear friend who is now an American citizen who immigrated here from Iraq. And he said the way to counteract the lies of the right is to create bigger lies, which concerned me when he said that. But when you said that they being the other side, repeat and repeat lies, yet the progressives do not do that, what's the alternative? Should we be making bigger lies? I really have a problem with that. How do you do that?
Well, aside from the fact that I think everybody on our side has a problem, willfully lying, it wouldn't work because we really need the repetition to go through the mainstream media, and they will not repeat it if it's obviously a left-wing lie. For some reason, they'll repeat right-wing lies, but they're not going to repeat them if we say them. However, we have truth on our side. What we need to do is to talk about it and to speak to people's real suffering and make them understand that there is something that they already believe about the rich having rigged the system that we agree with them on, and that's the real problem. So I don't think the solution is to have our own lies. I think the solution is to take those truths that fit pre-existing beliefs that persuadable voters have and really pound them with repetition.
Right. And I think Paula's getting at a point. It becomes incredibly frustrating that complete falsehoods being spewed and repeated in a way, and feeling that how can this be allowed to happen and not be checked? And I have to say that as frustrating as been that I have been with actually a lot of the mainstream media giving open forum and not holding accountable when now the President of the United States, or frankly any political leader of influence, can rattle off its mouth and not be called to the mat for complete falsehood. I think that there's been a uptick in accountability, but it does. I think there's a lot of people who are joining us today that are frustrated. Like, do we have to get in the gutter in the same way that our opponents do? And I think, Bernie, you offer a solution that is, directly not only tied to what we believe, but has the staying power to win this fight long term. And I think it's also important to realize that who are we talking to? There's, a large group of the people who are regurgitating this stuff will believe it no matter what. And if we show them all the evidence to believe differently, this fits into their worldview. I mean, it's aligned with their identity and what they want to believe. And you're not going to shake that. I mean, this persuadable audience that we're fighting for. We have another question here from Emily. Emily, are you with us? Emily, are you there? Oh, I think maybe she clicked on it by. Oh, here we go. We got another person here. Stephanie, are you with us? If you're speaking, we can't hear you. You're on mute. I'm going to put your hand down. If you have another question, raise it again, and I'll get to you. John has a question that he's posing to you. Bernie, can you talk about framing, aka George Lakoff and other things? And I believe then some of the other stuff you're going to be able to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I will get there. Let me suggest that Lakoff makes a number of points that are, exactly on point. He's one of the people who really emphasizes the importance of repetition, and that the way the brain works, there are memories that are encoded, and that some of them will fade if they're not refreshed with repetition, and others will get stronger and stronger with repetition. I think I'm going to address most of Lakoff's framing after the question, so I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Okay, we'll get to that. Stephanie, came through with a question here, and Stephanie and Arthur both have a similar question, where Stephanie's asking, will you repeat what you said about an idea in the brain, and Arthur is asking. You said that we already believe. What are our basic assumptions that are informing what we already believe? So can you restate that point?
Yeah. So just about, I'm going to get to this, but let me just preview it. People have in their minds conflicting information, and what we want to do is to reach that part of their beliefs that would be consistent with our solution, so that in the case of the overall economic problems of the white non-college educated voters, they hold in their heads two different beliefs. One is that the rich are to blame, and the other is that people of color are to blame, and that we need to understand that, and that we need to lead people on the path to truth and away from the path of bigotry and lies. And as I said, the difficulty is that it's kind of easier to invoke racism, to stoke hate. It's easier to get people to engage their emotions than to engage their rational thinking. But there are ways to get people past their emotional trigger points, and that's what I'm going to talk about after the questions. How do you keep people thinking long enough for them to understand our rational argument and not be diverted by their emotional, their hate and willingness to discriminate and be bigots, which is just amazingly prevalent right now.
I think, why don't we move into the next section, and if people have additional questions, they can type questions in or raise your hand, and in the next break, we'll get to those questions. So, Bernie?
Great. So, as I said, people hold conflicting beliefs in their heads about overall economics or other issues. And let me just repeat it. You know, people believe that the rich are to blame, and people believe that people of color are to blame. At least among persuadable voters, this is true of any issue. They have ideas in their heads that fit either side. And in fact, everybody carries in their heads a long list of pre-existing beliefs, stereotypes, and biases. You know, there's Democrats, Republicans, Independents. That's just the way our brains work. We, you know, through our lives, we get certain beliefs, but some of them conflict with others. But the thing about people who are in the base, people who, you know, have some strong feeling, that they'll hold on to those beliefs despite self-interest and in the face of facts. And those of you who've, you know, been on a Voicing Our Values workshop have heard this before, but, you know, it's so important. The problem is that people are not searching for truth. Instead, they're consciously or unconsciously seeking out information that conforms to their pre-existing beliefs. That's why conservatives watch Fox News. It makes them feel good to get facts that support their pre-existing beliefs. Even if the facts are completely false, they like it. It's fun. It makes them feel good. Simultaneously, people will ignore or refute in their minds information that seems to disprove these pre-existing beliefs. It's a selective use of evidence in which people reinforce to themselves what they already think. People participate in fooling themselves. I'll put it another way. When you're talking to somebody and their beliefs conflict with your solid facts, people reject the facts and they hold on to their beliefs. This, you know, this idea that people hold on to the facts despite information, I'm sorry, hold on to their beliefs no matter what, is actually quite been known by science for hundreds of years. But only in recent times has it been possible to do scientific experiments to try to figure out, you know, how this works. There's this book, The Political Brain, by Drew Weston. It's very good. He's a clinical psychologist at Emory University, and he used a functional MRI machine to examine what was going on in the brains of partisans in the 2004 election, people who supported either George Bush or John Kerry. He gave the test subjects a series of openly contradictory statements from each candidate, and based on confirmation bias, it was expected that each partisan would overlook the contradictions of his or her own candidate and would indignantly point out the contradictions of the opponent. And, you know, just as Drew Weston and all the scientists for hundreds of years would have expected, the test subjects did that exactly. They did that. But when Weston looked at the MRI, the subjects had not engaged the rational part of their brains. They had engaged their emotions. And further, after relying on their emotion to defend their candidate and attack their opponent, the brain's pleasure center released the neurotransmitter dopamine into the nucleus accumbens. So, as this is Weston, I'll just give you a couple sentences from his book. Once partisans had found a way to reason to false conclusions, not only did the neural circuits involved in negative emotions turn off, but circuits involved in positive emotions turned on. The partisan brain didn't seem satisfied just feeling better. It worked over time to feel good, activating reward circuits that give partisans a jolt of positive reinforcement for their biased reasoning. These reward circuits overlap substantially with those activated when drug addicts get a fix, giving new meaning to the term political junkie, Weston wrote. So it means that when you challenge someone's pre-existing beliefs and then they push back, not only are your arguments rejected, but you're also helping them get an emotional reward. They feel good for rejecting your argument, even if it's completely based on facts. Now, have you noticed that this psychological process is the same as the social identity process I explained earlier? That is, doing the wrong thing causes people to feel actual pleasure inside. And, this is a problem. So, 5 rules for addressing confirmation bias, because confirmation bias is really what's behind all these problems. The first is always, always start your argument in agreement with your audience, whoever you're trying to persuade. Never start a debate by saying or implying in any way that you're wrong, the listener is wrong, because the listener will just stop listening. I mean, that's it. You've lost them. There's no way to draw them back in. Persuasion is actually not about changing anybody's deeply held beliefs, because you can't. It's about finding a belief that's inside their heads already, and something that you share with your listener, and showing them that your shared belief leads to the solution that you're arguing for. What you're doing is you're starting from a point of agreement, and then you're giving your listeners a bridge from their preconception, what's in their heads, to your solution. And there's always a way to do this. Like the right to vote is the very foundation of democracy. Nobody's going to disagree with that. Or every American should have the opportunity to earn a decent wage. Okay. Or the rich should pay their fair share in taxes. There's no persuadable voter that's going to disagree with that, and I don't think there's anybody but the rich that would disagree with it. If you begin an agreement, then you demonstrate that automatic voter registration or higher minimum wage or this strong estate tax fits what the listener already believes. You want to show them that the thing that's in their head supports the solution that you're suggesting, so that they don't have to admit that they were wrong, they were right. You can do this not only with arguments, but the way that you support arguments with words. There's certain words that you use that can get an emotional response that is either favorable or unfavorable, so that when you say welfare, for example, that turns people away from you. It makes people think of the idea in their minds that's negative about the people you're trying to help. Or the word gun control tends to turn people off. Or for that matter, pro-choice. What happens with gun control and pro-choice is that you partisanize the conversation. That is, people take those terms to mean, oh, well, if you're a Democrat, you're supposed to be on one side, and if you're a Republican, you're supposed to be on the other. And they stop thinking, they think that you've just signaled that this is a partisan discussion. And it isn't. You're talking about a particular solution. So, in short, you're not trying to change people's minds. You're not trying to change the beliefs in their minds. You're trying to persuade them that you're on their side already. That there's something in their heads that you're in agreement with, and that your solution fits what they already believe. This is the same as what I was saying about the rich are the problem, not people of color. And notice again that this way of dealing with confirmation bias is the same as the us versus them problem. What you're trying to do is you're trying to persuade them that you're rooting for the same team, that you actually are on the same side, that they should identify with you, that their team should be with you. This wasn't done by Obama or Clinton. It just wasn't. And it's kind of the obvious thing to do when considering the problem of identity, the way people understand their identities, and confirmation bias. We have to start in agreement. The second is to use progressive values. Values are words with strong positive meanings built into them. So, private values, a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent, we used to say in Scouts. You see how positive meanings are built into words that are values. So the same behavior could be called thrifty or miserly. When we say thrifty, we're describing the behavior, but we're also saying that's good. It's built into the word. Or like brave. The scout is brave. Well, you could do something and you could call it foolhardy or you could call it brave. By calling it brave, you're saying it's good. So that when you use values, people understand you the same way you intend to be understood. When you're talking about public policy, there are values. Freedom, opportunity, security, liberty, equality, safety, for example, are progressive values that describe public policy goals and implicitly inside them declare that those goals are good and people are going to agree with you. When you use values, it informs listeners that once again, you're in agreement. You're on their side. Your goals agree with their goals. For many Americans, that is all that they care about, is their feeling assured that your goals are the same as their goals because they don't understand public policy. They don't understand your bill. They don't understand, anything about the way government works. But if they feel like you have the same goals, same overall goals as they do, then okay, you're on their side. That's why values work so well. And in fact, you're not limited to these values. In our book, Voicing Our Values, it has this chart, and that there are actually 3 kinds of values, and that there are many words to describe those 3, but that if you have a particular, usually economic situation, you're talking about the values that are in the middle there, that these are expressions that people are on your side when you use them because they understand that not only that's a goal, but that it's a good goal. Or if you're talking about, Social Security or criminal justice or whatever, the security column. In order to understand exactly how this works, all I can say is just take a look at our book. It's better than my trying to explain it in 1 minute. But values are ways to continue to be on someone's side, to say, I'm with you, I'm on your team, and that's the thing that we failed to do. The third rule is to show listeners how they benefit. Now, progressives favor policies that benefit society at large. We wish that a majority of Americans were persuaded, as we are, by appeals to the common good. But they aren't. In fact, it's quite difficult, to convince persuadable voters to support a policy that appears to benefit other than themselves, or their friends or families or their local neighborhood. Most Americans, when faced with a proposed government policy, want to know what it will do for them and to them. Their political beliefs are strongly individualistic. That means that you need to explain how your policy solution benefits them, their family, their friends, their local community. Now, that sounds difficult, but it isn't so hard. You know, when you're talking about climate change, you stress how it affects the listener's children and grandchildren. When you're talking about criminal justice reform, you show how it makes us all safer. When defending the Affordable Care Act, you remind listeners that without the ACA, they will once again, them personally, will once again be at the mercy of insurance company bureaucracies, no matter where they get their insurance from. They need to understand that it's about them. It's not about some poor people in some city that happens to look different than them. They need to, in their minds, when they picture this problem and this solution, they have to see a mirror of themselves rather than see somebody that looks different than themselves. Sad but true. If you're arguing for a program that clearly benefits people in poverty, right? Don't focus on the way the proposal helps the poor directly. Focus on how it indirectly benefits the listener. So almost anything that you're doing for people in poverty is going to stimulate the economy. It's going to help the local businesses. It's going to indirectly create jobs. It works. If you're arguing for the minimum wage, that's how you argue for it successfully. If people were in favor of helping people in poverty, they would already be in our base. They would not be persuadable. They're not the people you need to persuade. They don't think the way we think, and you can't persuade them by using the arguments that work with us. So just don't say them, say us, you, our families, friends, our neighbors. Make them feel included. You know, once again, this is just like the problem that we face with the blaming of people of color. Make people feel like they're on our team. The fourth rule is to target persuadable Americans, which I think I've been talking about, but I want to be explicit here. Taylor Swift sang "Haters Gonna Hate," and you know they're going to. There's about 40% of American voters who are not going to be persuaded, and they are not going to be susceptible to arguments about individuals shouldn't be discriminated against. But we don't need them. You are wasting your time when you try to persuade people who cannot be persuaded. All we need is to persuade a small slice of Americans, and we can start winning elections again. You know, Hillary Clinton would have beaten Trump if only 39,000 people in just 3 states had switched their votes. It was that close. That's 0.02% of voters switching. You know, and in reality, you know, Trump was actually supported by, I don't know, about 20% of eligible voters. So, you know, we just need to persuade the persuadables and activate the people who didn't come out to vote, and that's we don't need to persuade the people who are haters. Now, when I say this, I'm not trying to say that you should be a political moderate. That won't help anything. But you need to speak to the mainstream. These people who are persuadable are these people who are in the middle, you know, the kind of a purplish color above belief. Our base on the left is very intense in their beliefs and very strong in their beliefs. And on the right, the same thing is true. The persuadable voters will believe arguments on both sides. They have ideas in their minds that can be engaged by either side, and simultaneously, they don't have the same intensity that we do about these issues. So it doesn't matter to them as much. They are far more able to switch from one side to another. And we don't need to get a whole lot of them. We just need to focus on them and make them understand that we're the ones who are on their side. So, the fifth and last point. If you are an elected official, or if you are a political leader in any way, shape, or form, the problem right now is your base getting out ahead of you. I am afraid that there's a whole lot of Democratic elected officials in Congress who do not understand where their base is right now. Their base is ready to fight. Their base is ready to resist. Their base expects them to stand up and introduce strong legislation that's progressive and that's pushing back against Trump. The base is expecting them to stand up and complain publicly. The base is expecting them to join them at these demonstrations, be there. Progressive office holders have got to understand that they cannot let the base get out ahead of them, or they're going to lose their next primary election, because our base is incensed, rightly, and there are too many elected officials who don't get it. They need to be real leaders for their base and not just act like nothing happened last November, because the world is different. We have on our website, for example, an ideologue blog entitled 5 Bills to Help You Fight the Radical Right, and these are just ideas of things that you can introduce to show that you're resisting, and they're good bills, but even more important than them being good bills is that they show that you're out there leading our base. So that's pretty much it. Let's go to questions, and that's pretty much the presentation.
Well, there's a lot of information that was just shared, and I think Bernie set it up wonderfully that it's something we can put into practice virtually in any conversation. And a couple things just to underscore is being very clear who we're talking to use these techniques to bring as many of those folks with us, combine with our base, and want to lift up that last point. And I think that some of the comments that have come through, and I share some of the frustrations. Like there's been plenty of elections that I've been involved in the past, and losing always sucks. Losing in a time in which you feel that you question that what are we fighting for, or unclear, that the message gets muddled, what we're fighting for, is really frustrating, particularly when it's one that your base is clamoring for you to be fighting for them, and you fail to do so. And so we can never lose sight of that. It's got to be adding to that and building on that. And others are, giving. Other people are lifting up that the fifth point's really good, really timely, and frankly should, I think, serve as a kind of moral compass centering for all political leaders and operatives and other people in that space not to lose sight of moving forward. So Jack poses this question. I think it's also time, particularly given the conversation around people of color and race in the beginning segment, but I think it's also very relevant to this part. Is it important to challenge narratives that are based on blaming people of color? If so, how? Similarly, is it important to challenge narratives that say that the rich in policies that benefit them are the best thing for everybody? And if so, how that? So it's zeroing in, like, kind of coming back to the first segment and talking about some of these other things. To what level does the ownership of challenging some of these dominant narratives that a good chunk of our opponents are just so wet. I mean, it's almost unsavable. But how important is it to lift up and challenge those narratives with this persuadable audience that intensity on their beliefs might not be so rigid?
I think it's crucial. I think that this is the way that we turn the tide. We've got to stop letting those arguments go, and we have to push back against them with an argument that people can understand and in some way agree with. And we do have arguments on just about any issue where people really are on our side. Climate change. People believe that intense weather is accelerating at an incredible rate, and they think something awful is happening, and we need to push back. On any kind of First Amendment issue, the media being called the enemy of the American public, people have in their minds, whether it's at the top of their mind, I don't know, they have in their minds that we're right about the importance of freedom of the press, and we need to push back. If we don't, all they're getting is repetition from the right, and we need to have a narrative, a story that supports our side.
Right. And I would imagine, like, similarly, I mean, as it relates to like these policies, that we have to help the rich be richer because the rich create the jobs for all of us. I mean, pushing forth a narrative that challenges that and lures people to the truth. I assume that. I mean,
yes, absolutely. That, and people are ready for that. Yeah, they can be lazy and say, oh, the rich are the jobs creators. But if you push back and say, the system is rigged for the rich, and that's the problem. We need to have a level playing field. We need to have fairness in taxation, fairness in enforcement of regulations. People are going to be nodding their heads. They're saying, yeah, I know that's true. You're just taking something that they already believe, and you're showing them that that's really the solution.
Right. How much, when we talked about conviction, confirmation bias, and visceral emotional reactions driving people more than intellectual thought-based analysis, how much, I guess, resonating, and this is, coming from me, kind of paraphrase another question that's come up here, moving the conversation to, instead of a left versus right, like, political discourse, but shifting it to a right versus wrong. And I think that particularly just in, the last 30 days, which has been emotionally draining for any progressive across this country, and frankly, so many of our allies around the world. Almost like the moral authority that is lifted up in the idea of America and this nation and what we stand for, whether it's immigration policy, education policy. You go down the line. There definitely seems to be like this moral argument to be drifted, and I've actually heard a couple. I don't know if pundits is the right word, but other political leaders start using the right versus wrong frame to as a way of talking about this. Could you speak to that? Do you see it as an effective tool? Do you see it complementing this, or are there pitfalls to that?
Well, I'd be interested in hearing people make the argument and see how it sounds. But just generally speaking, that's what Hillary Clinton did, and what it failed to.
Was good enough.
Yeah, it failed to make people understand how they personally benefit from a Clinton administration, and that it kind of detached people, from their personal well-being. Um, and, you know, people are willing to be awfully terrible people. You know, it's not that hard to make people do things that are morally repugnant. You know, the funny thing is that when Hillary Clinton said that half the Trump supporters are a basket of deplorables, she was actually just shortening, you know, the polling that she was receiving. That is, at that time, her pollster said, you know, half his support are bigots. Unfortunately, you know, that grew. Moral deploring it didn't work.
Right.
Although maybe there's a way.
And I'm apologizing for the truth. Dominic posed a question, and if folks have additional questions, feel free to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on your control panel or typing questions in the question bar. Dominic poses this question: how do we push the National Democratic Party to realize a lot of the points made in here? And this is like a question when we've done similar messaging trainings. What is it going to take to get political leaders, whether it's future candidates, existing progressive elected leaders who share our values, all right, to start putting this stuff into practice? Where are the good best examples? I'm going to add to this, like the best examples, what's holding us back, because it definitely, I mean, I share Dominic's frustration. I mean, not only where the fight is, but how, I mean, answering the question, like, not only what do progressives stand for, what are we fighting for, in a way that puts these 5 points into practice.
Yeah, I totally share that and the frustration. You know, there is nothing more important in the short term than our side pressuring Democratic United States senators to have a backbone. Because we don't have any influence with the Republicans, and the House has no influence whatsoever. It's entirely a question of whether Democratic United States senators get this stuff and have the guts to act on it. We'll see. The problem with members of
maybe they'll
Congress,
join a webinar one day.
yeah. The problem with members of Congress, both Senate and House, is that each of them thinks that they are an expert in winning elections because each of them did. They all won a major election, and they don't see any reason why it should be any different than, you know, what they did. They're the last people to open up their minds to new ideas of how to win an election because they think they're experts. They won a big fight. And I used to be a campaign consultant for 10 years in the 90s, throughout the 1990s. And so I had hundreds and hundreds of clients, and it was much easier to work with people who are running, who were not incumbents. Anybody who's an incumbent, you're pushing up against their belief that they know how to do it.
Right.
You know, the short answer is, you know, maybe it's Keith Ellison.
If I think it's also important. I mean, the techniques that are being here, and that, I mean, certainly, if more progressive elected leaders start using it, would help further the argument. But there are a number of people who are joining us around the country today. You all live in states. You can all, I think, push back and reach, I mean, to your member in the Senate. But I mean, political leaders in your own right, and putting this into practice. I mean, the repetition needs to happen at all levels. And despite, and I'm in perfect agreement with what Bernie outlined in terms of the kind of the state of being that a lot of these entrenched political leaders already are and need to be held accountable for that. But when the ground starts shifting, when more and more people start talking this way and putting these things into practice, they might be the last to come aboard, but they will come aboard. And so, I mean, it's going to take a broader movement to help. I mean, give voice to these techniques, and then show and demonstrate the effectiveness of it, to be probably that final persuasion point to get someone to do something that they think they already know what to do. And I'm going to take one last question here from Jack, who's, regarding repetition, do progressives have media and social media venues with as much bandwidth as the right does? And are there grassroots networks with individual voices that can share the messages with friends and families in their communities? So, Bernie, I mean, can you speak to, like, how do we reach the masses with all the tools that are available to us? Is there one that's, I mean, better suited than others? Can you speak to some of, like, maybe the strategies and how we can be getting our message to that, especially that targeted, persuadable audience that is fairly low information, low intensity, but are big enough to make change an outcome in an election?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have the money of the right wing, Fox and Koch brothers and so forth. But anything that is done in any medium has a decent chance of reaching over to persuadable voters. One of the best avenues for persuading such voters is Saturday Night Live. It's just that's the way that people get their perception of reality, and it favors our side. But any of the cable programs that are progressives, any of the websites that are progressive, Daily Kos, for example, and then anything that anybody does to promote those things on their Facebook feed or other social networks, we don't have the money that the right wing has, but we have the better argument, and I think that if we just focus, we can get it across. And then eventually, we will have candidates who are spending money on communication, and they'll start to realize that, this is how they need to communicate.
Right. Well, that I'm going to call a close to this session. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and particularly Bernie for taking us through very timely, in the sense that we need to put these practices into action. The rules have changed in such a way, and where hate speech that some would think could never be uttered, particularly from a president, or the fake news that is that clearly is out there. Spreading misinformation. In giving us a pathway to putting and really speaking our values to reach the voter that we need, to reach the person that we need, to persuade and bring them to join us in our fight to move the needle in the direction of economic and social justice. Thank you so much for sharing with us, and I'll give you the final word.
Thank you, and again, if you have any suggestions, if you email to leadership@publicleadershipinstitute.org, I will get it within a few minutes, and I am interested in any ideas, because we're going to be working on this for the next 4 years.
Absolutely, absolutely, and take that to heart. I mean, put this stuff into practice. What works best, what doesn't, all of that. I mean, this is as much a learning process for all of us, with the goal of getting to a product and applying best practices and moving the conversation forward in these challenging and and rough times. But on that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Stay tuned. Every couple of weeks, we have one of these sessions around a policy issue, other communication strategies, and other topics. You can always find more information about the work that we're working on at our website. Again, that's www.publicleadershipinstitute. And thank you. And until next time, have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.